So what if the stories of Jesus were simply borrowed from a bunch of pagan myths and sources? I remember I ran into this issue all the way back when I was in my first year of college, and it wrecked me because I had never heard this challenge. I had never heard about this in any way, shape, or form, and nobody around me could give me any answers to this question. And it really caused me to struggle with my faith for a while, and I finally ran across an article or a chapter by C.S. Lewis entitled Myth Became Fact. And that was the first time I realized, hey, people have actually dealt with and struggled with this question before me. This is not a new thing. This is something Christians have struggled with for a long time, and there's answers to it. And going all the way back to the late 2nd century, there's a philosopher, and his name's Celsus. And Celsus actually accused Christians of having borrowed all their stories of Jesus from the Greco-Roman myths and from the different hero stories. He says, you borrowed all of it. You borrowed the virgin birth from that. You borrowed the resurrection from that. And all the way back in the 3rd century, Origen of Alexandria wrote this work called Contra Celsum, against Celsus. And this work, against Celsus, he demonstrates that Christians had not, in fact, borrowed any of these stories from the pagan sources. But this accusation has still persisted all the way down to our present day. And there's two things I would say in response to the question of, are the stories of Jesus borrowed from pagan sources? Here's the first one. The parallels aren't nearly as parallel as people seem to think. If you really look at the original sources, the original documents about these cults and these gods, or the artistic depictions of them, you see that they really aren't that similar to Jesus after all. So let's take one example. Horus, for example, was an Egyptian deity who I've read in several sources. They say he was crucified and rose from the dead. And yet the reality is, according to the monuments, according to different art about Horus, is that he was stung by a scorpion and revived by a moon god. And any connection to the cross that's made is on the basis of the Ankh, which is a symbol, an Egyptian symbol that looks similar to a cross, but it's actually a key. It has nothing to do with a cross at all, and yet people say that Horus was crucified and raised from the dead. It's simply not true. We could go back to Mithras. That's an interesting one that often people claim that Mithras was a virgin-born god. In fact, they say he was virgin-born in a cave and was assisted there by shepherds. And yet, if you actually look at the sources, the reality is that Mithras was born from solid stone. And there were some people in a field who came and assisted Mithras in being pulled out of the stone, and he left a cave behind him. And I guess that's sort of a virgin birth. I don't know how you tell if a rock is a virgin, but it's certainly not parallel to the stories of Jesus. And yet people say that Mithras was a virgin-born god. Another example, one more. Dying and rising gods. People say often dying and rising gods, that the resurrection is borrowed from that. But yet, if you look at the stories of the dying and rising gods, and there are a handful of them, if you look at those, these were stories about agricultural cycles, not a once and for all death, not a once and for all resurrection. These were about agricultural cycles, something very, very different from Jesus, because in Jesus, we have somebody who's born in a particular place at a particular time that's connected to actual rulers who we are given the years that these rulers ruled and Jesus' relation to them. That's something not in agriculture, not a cycle of the seasons, but it's something in history with a particular place and a particular time. It's why C.S. Lewis said, we pass from the pagan gods dying, nobody knows when or where, to a historical person crucified under Pontius Pilate. That's very different. So first off, the parallels just aren't as parallel as people seem to think. But there's a second reason as well. Any parallels that there are because of the truth that God has inscribed on our hearts. Yes, there are dying and rising gods. Yes, there is sacrifice. Yes, there is a yearning for immortality and new life in some of these stories. But the reason it's there is because God has inscribed those longings on our hearts. It's not because Christians borrowed their stories from the pagan gods. It's because God has inscribed on every human heart a recognition that we need a savior, a recognition that we need a sacrifice. We know that we were built for, we were designed for eternity. And so anytime there are parallels, it's not because Christians borrowed those stories. It's because God has inscribed on the human heart a yearning for eternity, and it points to the truth that is revealed in fullness in Jesus Christ.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, visit sbts.edu/sample to access free theology lectures from Southern Seminary.